Hi everyone, this is Noah Sandler from MTGO Academy, and today I'm going to be doing my top 4 uncommons for Eldritch Moon. So we're going to get started with white, and at number 4 we've got Subjugator Angel. It's 4 and 2 white, 4/3 flying. When it enters the battlefield, tap all creatures your opponents control. So this is not a card that you're going to be playing in a control deck. As a 3 toughness, 6 mana creature, it doesn't block very well, and it's not consistent enough as the finisher by itself. But in an aggressive deck, this can be a great curve topper. It lets you attack with all of your creatures the turn that you play it, and then your opponent also has to deal with a 4/3 flyer. So it can give you a lot of damage, plus giving you this good threat for the follow-up turns. You can usually win the game in either 1 or 2 turns. There are some ways to abuse this as well. If you've got the blue card Displace that flickers 2 creatures you control at instant speed, you can do this on your opponent's turn before their combat step, so preventing an attack, and then on your turn you can attack with all your creatures again. So kind of a cool combo that maybe you could set up in a blue-white deck, but otherwise just a great curve topper for aggressive decks. And number 3 is Courageous Outrider. 3 and a white for a 3/4 human. When it enters the battlefield, look at the top 4 cards of your library. You can take a human card from them, put in your hand, and the rest of them at the bottom of your library. So by itself, 3/4 for 4 mana is pretty reasonable. It's not something that you could never cut if you have some other great 4-drops, but assuming you had no other humans, it's certainly fine to just play this for its stats. But if you get a human, then it becomes insane. Like drawing a card, and a human's probably going to be better than just a random card from your deck that might be a land. Drawing a card off a card that's already good for its stats, like good stats for its cost, is amazing. And the more humans you have, the more likely that's going to be. Even if you just have a couple other humans, I think I would always play this. And if you have like 7 or 8, then it's going to be really consistent at finding something. And there's some really great humans to hit with this. So this can be a really powerful card for your deck if you have a lot of humans, but it's still pretty good if you don't. Number 2 is Faith Unbroken. 3 and a white, aura, enchant creature you control. When it enters the battlefield, exile target creature an opponent controls until Faith Unbroken leaves the battlefield, and enchanted creature gets +2/+2. So I hate this card. I despise it. I hate that I am going to have to play this card. It's going to win a lot for me, and it's going to lose a lot for me. It's an aura, so if your opponent has removal, you can get 2 for 1. On top of that, there are some situations which, if you're a good player, you're going to try to avoid, but you could end up attacking with multiple creatures. Your opponent removes a creature with Faith Unbroken on it, and then they get to block their large creature on one of your other creatures and actually get a 3 for 1 off of it. So try to avoid that situation. But, that's the downsides, and those are big downsides. As a good player, you do not want to be opening yourself up to 2 for 1s. On the other hand, if they don't have removal, this card is so good. You kill their best creature, you make one of your creatures large, and that combines really well together, because now you have this creature that is able to attack through the rest of your opponent's defenses. You just remove their biggest creature. And because your creature now has 2 extra toughness, it's less likely to be killed by burn spells or pump spells. So your opponent might just not have a way to deal with this. And if they don't, it's really, really good. So unfortunately, just like the Ordeals from Theros, this is a card that you're going to have to take high, you're going to have to play it, and you're just going to have faith that it's going to work for you, because sometimes it will, it's going to be amazing, sometimes it won't, it's going to be terrible. But it's just so good that I don't think you can avoid playing this card. And at number 1, Lone Rider. 1 and a white, 1/1 human, first strike lifelink, and at the beginning of the end step, if you gain 3 or more life this turn, you transform it into It That Rides as 1. It's a 4/4 Eldrazi horror with first strike, trample, and lifelink. So first, we're going to look at the front side. 1/1 first strike lifelink by itself is not really worth running. It's not horrendous. It still stops all your opponent's 1 toughness creatures from attacking. If your opponent lets it attack, you can drain for a couple damage. That can be okay. But this is not a card that you're ever going to run if you don't have ways to pump it. So transforming it, you need to gain 3 or more life this turn. That's typically going to be done by pumping the Lone Rider at least 2 power, though there are some other life gain effects in the format. Usually you're just going to try to pump it, and there are a decent number of ways to do that. You can use a variety of combat tricks that pump 2 power. There's the Faith Unbroken card that we just went over, and there's also an enchantment that's +2/+2 in this set, the aura that you can sacrifice a permanent to give the creature flying. And if you pump it up to 3 power, usually you're going to be able to attack with it, and it should survive because it has First Strike. So this isn't that hard to pull off, to flip it. And once you do flip it, getting the 4/4 First Strike Trample lifelink is quite a beast. And 4 toughness is sort of hard to kill, and it's really hard to block because of the First Strike. Now there are some really large Eldrazi creatures, so this isn't necessarily going to be the largest creature on the board, but if they don't deal with it, it races so well, you gain so much life, deal so much damage that probably win the game. So I think as long as you have 2 or more ways to pump it, you'd prefer 3 or 4, but I think even with 2, it's got a really high upside. I'd probably still play it. But I think it is just a high pick for how powerful it is. It is reminiscent of Invisible Stalker, Butcher's Cleaver, not quite as good, but still has the potential to just end games, and it is really hard to deal with once you get going. And on to blue. Number 4, Vexing Scuttler. 8 mana for 4/5 Eldrazi with Emerge, 6 and a blue. When you cast it, you may return target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand. So you play something on turn 3, turn 4, you can play this. Unfortunately, if you do that path that you're frequently going to do with a lot of the other Emerge creatures, you're probably not going to actually have a good instant or sorcery card in your graveyard. So this isn't really the curve out kind of Emerge creature. It's more of a late game card, so you want to wait till you use an instant or sorcery that's good, like a removal spell or maybe some good card draw. Then you play Scuttler, you get a good sized body, and then you get to reuse that spell. There are some really, really good instants and sorceries, and blue is combined with red going to be the Spells Matters deck, so this is going to be a really good card there to make up for the creature that you're sacrificing with some card advantage, getting back an instant or sorcery. Number 3 is Drownyard Behemoth. 9 mana for a 5/7 Eldrazi with Flash, Emerge 7 and a blue, and it has hexproof as long as it entered the battlefield this turn. So the way this is set up, it's meant to be cast on your opponent's turn during their attack step. You get to eat their largest creature that has, that doesn't have flying. And because it has hexproof, the second it enters play, your opponent can't use any removal spell, so you're going to eat that creature, unless if they have a really large pump spell, but it has 7 toughness and 5 power, so it's probably just eating anything it falls in front of. And because you're going to kill something when you play it, it makes up for the Emerge cost. And also that it has Flash means that if your opponent uses a removal spell on one of your creatures, you can just flash it in response, and that will also give you it'll make up for the Emerge cost and keep you even on card advantage. And then on your turn, you have a 5/7 creature, you smash with it. Finally, on your opponent's turn, they get to use their sorcery speed removal, and there's not even a ton of that actually gets rid of this card. So, it's just a huge blowout in combat and really hard to deal with afterwards. It just makes it really, really powerful. Not to mention that there are those great creatures that have abilities when they get sacrificed that makes this even better. Number 2 is Geist of the Archives. 2 and a blue for a 0/4 Spirit with Defender with, at the beginning of your upkeep, scry 1. So this is like Sigiled Starfish. It has more toughness, which means it's less susceptible to removal, and it also blocks more effectively. You can block Hill Giants with it. And being able to scry once each turn just gives you so much value over the course of a long game. It means you're just very unlikely to have dead draws. Your cards are just going to be a lot better than your opponents, and typically that's just good enough to win a game. It's hard to really calculate how good that is, but if the game goes long, you're probably just going to win the game. So really good card. And number 1, Nebelgast Herald. 2 and a blue, 2/1 Flash Flying Spirit, and whenever it or another spirit enters the battlefield under your control, tap target creature and opponent controls. So this is very reminiscent of Pestermite. You play this on your opponent's beginning of combat step, tap their biggest creature, prevent from attacking, and on your turn you attack for 2 flying, plus some of your other creatures could get through since you've tapped their best creature. So that by itself is already quite good, but you throw on top of it that every other spirit you play could tap one of your opponent's creatures. So, that is frequently going to be sorcery speed, but there's also other spirits with flash. So potentially you could play Herald, tap down their creature, attack back. On their next turn, you get to do the same thing with another flash spirit, and that's just really good. That's like chaining Pestermites. So yeah, by itself, this card is really good for its effect, just preventing damage to yourself or helping you get other creatures through with a 2/1 flyer. But once you have other spirits in the mix, it starts to become pretty insane. So it's the number 1 blue uncommon. Moving on to black. Number 4, Haunted Dead. 3 and a black, 2/2 zombie. When it enters the battlefield, put a 1/1 white spirit token with flying onto the battlefield. You can pay a black and a colorless, discard 2 cards to return it from a graveyard to the battlefield tapped. So by itself, it's reasonable value. It's kind of like Sandstep Outcast for 1 more mana. This time you get a 2/2 and a 1/1 flyer. So that's kind of cool. Getting 2 creatures out of 1 is nice. It's also very nice with Emerge, giving you a 4 mana card to sacrifice. You still get the spirit out of it, and then later in the game you could return it. It's a discard outlet for Madness and helps you get to Delirium. It's a good card to recur with other recursion spells, and also is a good card for go wide token decks. At number 3 we have Abundant Maw. 8 mana for a 6/4 Eldrazi with the merge 6 and a black. When you cast it, target opponent loses 3 life and you gain 3 life. So this can do a decent Siege Rhino impression. On turn 3 you play your creature, turn 4 you can emerge this, you get a 6/4 and you drain for 3. So that's pretty similar to Siege Rhino. Yeah, it's colorless or just black mana to cast, so it's not as oppressive on your mana base as Siege Rhino. But it's still certainly no Siege Rhino. I mean, like the 4/5 with Trample meant you're getting a lot more damage in when it starts attacking. It's harder to kill. So, the 6/4 is easier to trade with. Now, draining your opponent for 3 life is not worth a card. So comparing this to some of the other emerge cards, like the blue ones that, directly get you a card back when you emerge, this isn't quite as good value. But the 3 life you gain can still buy you some time to stabilize, and the 3 life they lose helps you finish them more quickly, so still a very powerful card. At number 2, Ruthless Disposal. 4 and a black, sorcery. As additional cost to cast it, discard a card and sacrifice a creature, and it gives 2 target creatures -13, -13 until end of turn. So this card requires a heavy investment, playing this, paying 5 mana, discarding a card, and sacrificing a creature, but it gives you a very heavy reward, killing your opponent's best 2 creatures. There is limited creature removal in this format to deal with large creatures, and this can kill Eldrazi. So just as kind of a safety measure, this allows you to not die to a couple large creatures. But it's actually good on offense and defense. So if you're if you have a lot of small creatures, you're winning on offense. Your opponent plays a big blocker and shuts down your offense. You can just wait around until they play their second creature, play Disposal, sacrifice your worst creature, discard a card, then you get to attack in with all the rest of your creatures. But it's really good defensively, and I feel like it's going to play a lot like either Wrath of God or Plague Wind even. In that, like when I usually play a Wrath of God effect, I don't just sit back and hold all my cards in my hand and just let my opponent attack me and keep playing creatures until I play the Wrath. I'll usually play out a couple small creatures. I want to keep my opponent committing, and then eventually, when the moment's right, I'll play the Wrath. And I'll still lose a couple cards in the process, but I've gotten rid of some of my opponent's key cards, and I've saved some of my key cards, and that's allowed me to win. I think Ruthless Disposal works in a similar way. So you can still keep some creatures out, you hold some cards in hand. You're going to be sacrificing resources in order to do this. So you're usually going to spend 3 cards for your opponent's 2. but the fact that you get to kill your opponent's best 2 cards, and you get to wait and time it for the moment that is going to just blow the game up. I mean, your opponent thinks that they're about to finish you off. You kill their best 2 creatures. I mean, that's going to stall their attack really hard and going to buy you a lot of time. And then you throw on potential for madness, though you're paying 5 mana, so you're probably not going to madness stuff off this. But it's also great for delirium because you're putting a sorcery, a random, like a card from your hand, which could be a land, which can be hard to get in your graveyard otherwise, and a creature into the yard. So playing this can also just give you delirium straight up. So yeah, extremely powerful card. I feel like it'll probably be underrated at first, but it just has such an insanely powerful effect that it's worth it just to have it in your hand and have the option to cast this card. I think it's something you're going to have to pick highly when this format has been fully discovered. Just don't get it countered. And number 1 is Murder. 1 and 2 black, instant, destroy target creature. Yep. These days, this is really cheap for kill anything removal at instant speed, so you get potential 2-for-1s, and this is just a great format for this card, because there's the large Eldrazi creatures, the werewolves, cards like Faith Unbroken. There's a lot riding on your opponents having their large creatures stay in play, and yeah, Murder can just blow that out. Your opponent could go for a Prey Upon or a Clear Shot. You can Murder in response. It's really hard to expect because it's the only card that does what it does, instant speed, in this format. So yeah, just really, really insane card. Going to be a very high pick. One of the best uncommons in the set. Now moving on to red. Number 4, Smoldering Werewolf. 2 and 2 red. It's a 3/2 werewolf. When it enters the battlefield, it deals 1 damage to each of up to 2 target creatures, and it can transform for 4 and 2 red into Erupting Dreadwolf, a 6/4 Eldrazi werewolf. Whenever it attacks, it deals 2 damage to target creature or player. So we'll start with the front side. Without transforming, how good is it? It really depends on your opponent's deck and their board. So if they have lots of 1 toughness creatures, potentially you could just kill 2 creatures and get a 3/2, which is insane. But if you can kill 1 creature, you're already very happy. It was sort of like a Necrotal effect. I mean, you're not killing your opponent's giant creature, but you're still getting some card advantage off the deal. But beyond just killing 1 toughness creatures, it can actually kill larger creatures than that. You can attack pre-combat. If you attack your 3/3 into their 2/4, they're probably going to block, and then Werewolf is going to finish off their 2/4, and maybe even a 1 toughness creature in addition. So you can definitely wreck people with this card. It's uncommon, so people may not be playing around it, though there is another uncommon in red that has a similar effect. So maybe people will learn to play around this effect. But either way, you can actually take out some pretty large creatures or help you trade up your 2/2 into a 3/3 post-combat. And yeah, that's just the first side of the card, and that's already good. And then it transforms into a 6/4 that deals 2 damage to target creature or player when it attacks, and that's obviously great. It may just trade with your opponent's 4/4, good-sized creature, because the 2 damage can't get rid of that, but you're probably going to take out another small creature when you attack the first time. If your opponent doesn't have anything on the board, this hits for 8 damage. That's a ton. But you add on the 2 damage you get from this, you're probably taking out a card. When you trade it, you're probably taking out a pretty big card, and you probably got a card out of its first 1 damage. So this is very frequently going to be a 3-for-1. Could easily be more than that. So that's just a lot of potential for 1 card, and pretty reasonably costed at that. Number 4 is Weaver of Lightning. 2 and a red, a 1/4 human with reach. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, it deals 1 damage to target creature an opponent controls. So, in your average red deck, this will probably be weaker than the werewolf, but in the Spells Matters deck, this card's going to be really great. So 1/4 reach for 3 mana by itself is actually quite good. Well, not quite good, but it's decent. It's going to hold off a lot of flyers, and just gives you a decent blocker to hold off early attackers. It's pretty reasonably costed. But its ability, whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, dealing a damage to target creature, that means any instant or sorcery you play, you can kill a 1 toughness creature, so it allows you to get some card advantage that way. But it also upgrades your burn spells, so if you had a shock, now it's a lightning bolt. and yeah, it can just help you kill bigger things with that. And then if you ever leave mana up, your opponent has a lot of small creatures out, it's really hard for them to attack into the Weaver because any instant you play could blow out their team. So this is a card that just sits there, and it makes it hard for your opponent to actually attack into it profitably. So it just buys you a lot of time. And I think time is something you really want in the red-blue spells deck. Usually the problem with those types of decks is that their creatures suck, and they have low toughness, and the flyers are generally understated for their cost. So you end up having to trade your 4-drop for your opponent's 2-drop. And you just don't have enough time. You have to trade off your creatures, otherwise you're going to die. You don't have enough time to set up a big mass of all these spells to win the game with. But Weaver of Lightning really allows you to switch that around, because you now have this great creature for just slowing down your opponent, and it buys you time to draw into more spells in order to get more uses out of its abilities. So it's a really, really key card for that archetype, and probably any red deck is going to have enough spells to justify running this. At number 2, we have Incendiary Flow, 1 and a red sorcery. It deals 3 damage to target creature or player. If the creature dealt damage this way would die this turn, exile it instead. So yeah, 2 mana, sorcery, 3 damage to creature or player. This could finish your opponent off if you get them low, but just lets you kill any medium or small creature for 2 mana, and that's just great. The red-blue is going to have the Spells Matters deck, and so this is just going to be a great spell that you can add to that. Being able to exile, yeah, it prevents some of the go to the graveyard effects from there's more creatures now that have those for emerge cards, and this can kill them without triggering their dying effect. So it's just a really great card, splashable, and is going to be a really high pick. And now, number 1, uncommon for red, and also for the rest of the set, is Savage Alliance. 2 and a red instant with Escalate 1. Choose 1 or more. Creature's target player controls gain trample until a turn. It deals 2 damage to target creature, and it deals 1 damage to each creature target opponent controls. So this card does a lot of stuff. Let's try to break it down at the simplest level. It deals 2 damage to target creature for 3 mana at instant speed. So it's like a Geist Blast, and that's fine. I've cut Geist Blast before from some red decks, but that's good enough to make the cut. And it does a lot of other stuff. So first, just to start there, this is a pretty good card. Then you start adding the other effects, and all these effects actually work really well together. So if you combine the 2 damage to our creature with 1 damage to each creature target opponent's controls, that's 4 mana. You're actually dealing 3 damage to one creature and 1 damage to all creatures your opponents control. So that's 4 mana at instant speed to deal 3 to 1 and 1 to all the rest of the creatures. That's pretty close to Cone of Flame, which is one of the best uncommons for limited in history. That dealt 3, 2, and 1. So this deals 3, 1, 1, 1. So I mean, already that is insane, and that's for less mana. Throw in all this flexibility that you can just cast it for 3 mana. I mean, the weak point of Cone of Flame is that sometimes there's, just one creature in play, and you had to deal some damage to yourself. Not terrible, but something you'll eat up usually. But, and it also costs 5 mana. I mean, this is 4 mana to do just about the same thing. And then it has the other ability, creature target player controls gain trample until a turn, which... that's the weakest ability on its own. You're not going to spend a card to give that to your creatures. But when you combine it with these other abilities, dealing 1 to all your opponent's creatures, giving your creatures trample, and dealing 2 to another creature, that means that when you attack with a bunch of creatures, you are getting minimum 2 damage from the damage you dealt to a creature, and then 1 for each creature that your opponent blocks with of potential trample that's going through, and whatever other power that you have from your creatures that's going to go through. So not only is this probably killing your opponent's medium creature, maybe killing one of their small creatures, and then giving you, it also gives you 6 damage to your opponent's face, maybe even more. That just makes this card insane. It is definitely the mythic common, and is one of the best cards in the set. There are some very good cards in the set. This would definitely make it onto my top 15 bombs list. my next video coming out. But because I'm going over here, I'm just going to leave it off that. I'm going to leave that video just to the rares and mythics. But this card is insane. Do not pass this card. It's also splashable. So yeah, Hearthstone Swipe, this might even be better. Now moving on to the green cards, we have at number 4, Tangleclaw Werewolf. 2 and 2 green, 2/4 werewolf. It can block an additional creature each combat, and you can pay 6 and a green, transform it into Fibrous Entangler. 4/6 Eldrazi Werewolf with Vigilance. It must be blocked if able, and it can block an additional creature each combat. So there are a few werewolves at uncommon for green that all fall about around the same place in the B- range, and could have been the 4th best uncommon. But I went with this one. I feel like it's a 2/4 that helps you block early, and it actually buys you time in order to flip it. Where with some of the other werewolves, they have low toughness, they're more likely to trade early, and it's harder to actually flip them. So I like the combination of a good defensive creature with a strong flip. So by itself, it's a 2/4 for 4, can block an additional creature each combat. That ability isn't usually going to come up. The way it comes up is your opponent just makes an all-in attack, and this just prevents you from dying. You get to throw it in front of 2 large creatures, and that's nice to have, but it doesn't add too much value to the card. But it's just a 2/4, and it's going to slow down your opponent's attacks pretty well. But when you flip it for 7 mana, 4/6 Vigilance, must be blocked if able, and can block an additional creature each combat. Those abilities and stats work really well together. So 4/6 with Vigilance that can block an additional creature means your opponent's not going to be able to attack you. They're not going to be able to go wide. They need 6 power creature to get through the Entangler. So this just shuts down your opponent's ground. They need flying creatures to get through you. And in the meantime, you can be attacking with the Entangler. The first turn you play it, your opponent's hoping to have 6 power worth of blockers out. And if you have pump spells or other removal, then you're just going to wreck their board. But if they don't have that, you're going to eat a creature every single turn, and then it's going to be harder and harder for them to actually get up to 6 power and play. So this is going to lock them out of the game at a certain point. And yeah, 6 toughness is hard to kill. There's not that many ways to remove large creatures in this format. So yeah, it's worth flipping. So while the front side is certainly not exciting, it's just passable. I mean, you wouldn't play it for just the front side. I think the fact that it buys you time, and then the second side is so insane. I think that this is actually just a really good combination of just slowing the game down and setting up for this really pretty insane creature to take over the game. Number 3, Somberwald Stag. 3 and 2 green, 4/3 elk. When it enters the battlefield, you may have it fight target creature you don't control. So that lets it basically kill any creature with 4 or less toughness and 2 or less power. So anything a 2/4 or weaker, this is going to kill, and it's going to give you a 4/3. And that's great. So some of the best targets will be, 2/4s of course, but also just flying creatures or utility creatures, a tapper. This is going to take them out and give you a 4/3 creature, and that's an amazing deal. If your opponent has like a 4/4 in play, this can just read 5 mana, deal a sorcery, deal 4 damage to target creature, and that's also fine. That's passable. And if you have any way to get this out of your graveyard, maybe a cheap pump spell, you could play this, pump it to actually take out a larger creature. It can get even better. But just, very solid, very easy to get good 2-for-1s with this card. At number 2, Noose Constrictor. 1 and a green, 2/2 snake with reach. You can discard a card. It gets +1/+1 until on the turn. And you can use that ability as many times as you have cards in your hand. So this is basically Wild Mongrel, which was the best or second best common from Odyssey, and that was a block that had Madness and a lot of graveyard mechanics. There's a lot of that in this set with Delirium and Madness. So there's definitely ways to abuse this, but without any way of abusing it, you have a 2/2 for 2. For starters, that's marginal playable, and unlike other 2/2s for 2, this one just attacks through 2/3s. because if your opponent blocks, you just discard one card, and you basically just played a removal spell, and they're 2/3. So this is actually going to attack really well compared to other bears, and this is just going to keep getting in damage over time. It also is a great blocker. Having reach can stop small flyers. You put it in front, discard one card, you get to take out like a Windrake. So just having this in play, it gives you a lot of options. And then you can discard 2 cards, make it a 4/4, kill a hill giant. It just is very flexible. And when you throw in Madness and Delirium, being able to instant speed just hit Delirium or instant speed Madness cards out is really insane. And I mean, this card is basically as good as Wild Mongrel, so it's just going to be a really high pick, and yeah, it should be pretty insane in this format. And at number 1 is Clear Shot. 2 and a green, instant. Target creature you control gets +1/+1 until end of turn. It deals damage equal to its power to target creature you don't control. So, rather than the fight mechanic, this is the Rabid Bite effect of just dealing the creature's power to a creature. So you're, unlikely to get, to have to trade your creature for the effect, unlike fight. So, yeah, this card's great. It's 3 mana, instant speed removal. A lot of times, it's basically just going to be a murder. Now, your opponent could remove your creature in response, but there's not that many ways to do that, so it's a relatively safe thing to just wait to your opponent's turn to use. And just like instant speed removal, if your opponent plays a pump spell, you can Clear Shot in response. But this card also has the potential to be even better than murder. If your opponent, if you're in combat with your opponent and you say have a 3/3 versus your opponent's 3/4, the +1/+1 that you give your creature might actually win you a combat in addition to letting you kill another creature. So that can give you a 2-for-1, or if your opponent's using a pump spell themselves, you could maybe even get a 3-for-1 out of the card. So yeah, instant speed, relatively cheap, not too much risk to it. So yeah, it just makes it a really, really good card. And good splashful removal. Green rarely gets that. And now we're going to move on to the top 4 gold uncommons. There are not that many gold uncommons, but they're all relatively influential, so I think a top 4 list is still important here. So we're going to start with Mourn Willow. It's 1 a black and a green for 3/2 haste, and Delirium, it makes creatures with power 2 or less not block this turn. So it's kind of a weird ability. Delirium usually works best on more controlling creatures, so having it on a 3/2 haste is a little weird. 3/2 haste by itself for 3 mana is pretty good. So if you're just black-green and you can cast this consistently, then yeah, it's a card you'll play. And the Delirium effect works pretty well with this card because it means that your opponent's not going to be able to trade like a 2/1 with it. And then, yeah, could help you get some more damage through and prevent chumps, but still just kind of a weird ability. But yeah, it's a 3/2 haste for 3, and that's fine. So it's a card that is not super exciting, not something that you'd splash, but is just going to be a solid card in a black-green deck. Number 3 is Mercurial Geist. 2 a blue and a red for 1/3 Flying Spirit. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, it gets +3/+0 until end of turn. So this can be a really good finisher for the red-blue spells matters deck. Basically any red-blue deck is going to have enough spells to make this card good. And if you play 2 spells, it deals 7 damage as an attacker. So, I mean, it's like We Dragonauts for 1 more mana that gets 1 more power per spell. But yeah, it can add up quickly. And if some of your spells cycle, draw you into more cards, you can kind of just go off with this card. It's not a bad blocker until you can set your spells up, holds off some small flyers. But what's really cool about it is you can use Uncaged Fury and Rush of Adrenaline to one-shot your opponents. That's 20 damage with 1 attack. So hopefully you can pull that play off, because that'd be really, really sick. At number 2, we've got Ride Down. Red and a white, instant, destroy target blocking creature. Creatures that were blocked by that creature this combat gain trample until end of turn. So this kills a blocking creature and will allow you to get some extra damage over to your opponent's face. So that's something that's good in aggressive decks. And red-white, is going to be the aggressive deck. So it's just a great fit for that deck. You want to get more damage to your opponent's face, and the removal you use is probably just going to be used to remove blockers. You're not concerned too much about defense. So this is just a huge tempo swing. It only costs 2 mana, so you can play a creature and use Ride Down on your turn. It just puts you really far ahead in tempo and helps you finish your opponent quickly. So this is just an amazing card for a red-white deck. And at number 1, we've got Lashweed Lurker. It's 8 mana for a 5/4 Eldrazi Horror with a Merge 5, a green, and a blue. Whenever you cast it, you may put target non-land permanent on top of its owner's library. So to understand this card, I'll take you back to the original Ravnica. There's a card, the Dalkin Dismisser, for 5 and a blue. It was a 2/2 with basically the same ability. And, you know, that's extremely overcosted for a 2/2 to pay 6 mana, but the card was actually one of the best commons in the format. Now, there were some ways to abuse it that we don't quite have with Lurker, but Lurker is a 5/4 compared to a 2/2, so that's like a large threat, and it can be played on turn 4, rather than turn 6. So, if you have a 3-drop, and in blue-green, there are a good number of creatures that give you value when you sacrifice them, like Byway Courier, Exultant's Cultist. So if you play one of those, and then you play Lurker on turn 4, you get to time ebb your opponent's creature that they played. You have a 5/4 out, you deny them their next draw. I just don't see how your opponent wins that game. On turn 4, dealing with a 5/4 and being time ebbed is just so insane. And even if you don't have like an abusive creature to use with it that you're going to get value out of, it's just still such a big tempo swing to trade your 2/3 creature to get this 5/4 out, and you're denying them a draw, so you're still staying even on card advantage and getting such a huge tempo swing. So I wasn't a big fan of blue-green in Shadows over Innistrad. It's got the Clues archetype, and then it also has kind of a tempo thing going on. But I think the Emerge deck for blue-green is probably going to be a good bit stronger. It's hard to say for sure, but if it is, this is going to be one of the best cards in that archetype, and this might be the reason why that archetype becomes good. So that's going to do it for today. As far as artifacts, there's not much that I'm interested in playing. There's Cryptolith Fragment, which I'm not a fan of, but is a very interesting card, but not one that I'm going to be playing, so I'm just going to skip artifacts at this point. And now we can take a moment. I'm going to go on to the top 15 bombs of the format in my next video, but I think now is the time to look at just what are the best colors. Now that we've looked at the commons and the uncommons, and I think it's pretty clear that red did really well. Has some very, very good commons, some just like top tier commons, as well as a lot of depth. And then when you look at the red uncommons, they're also really, really good. So red just seems really insane. And then I think the second color that's done really well is blue. Remember, blue I gave 5 commons, basically like an equivalent rating. None of them are insane in commons, but it's a lot of depth. And then I think the blue uncommons are also really good. There's a lot of depth there for really strong cards. So I think red and blue are both really good, and they combine really well together. So I think red-blue spells is probably going to be a very good archetype. And then in the middle, I think probably white. It's got a couple strong commons, but falls off after that. And I think the uncommons are okay, but nothing really insane. And then I think green has some strong uncommons, has a really strong common in Ulvenwald Captive, but falls off a little bit there. And I think black is probably the worst. I think the black commons, Boon of Emrakul is great, but they fall off pretty significantly after that. And I feel like the uncommons, Murder and Ruthless Disposal, are both great, but there's also a bit of a drop-off there. So if I had to rank the colors, I think it would be red, blue, white and green are very close, and then I would go with black. So that's it for today. Hope you enjoyed this and learned something. Stay tuned for my top 15 bombs in Eldritch Moon. So thank you for listening, and I will see you next time.